Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The static crackles for 3 full seconds before the voice begins. It belongs to Dr. Leonard Ashworth, former director of cosmological studies at DARPA, and even through the degraded audio you can hear something broken in the way he speaks, like a man who's seen the edge of reality and can't forget what looked back. For years, humanity dreamed of breaching the void. We finally did it, and the results were not what anyone expected. He pauses, and in that silence, you can hear him breathing, unsteady, deliberate. This is my testimony. Everything I'm about to tell you is documented, verified, and classified at levels most people don't know exist. I don't expect you to believe me. Some days, I don't believe it myself. But it happened. God help us all, it happened. The recording is dated November 15th, 2044. 9 years after Daniel Griffin walked back through a doorway that should have killed him, wearing a face that wasn't quite his anymore. To understand what went wrong, you have to go back to March 2031, to a night shift at the Atacama Large Millimeter Array in Chile, where a graduate student named Maria Santos was supposed to be calibrating routine observations. Instead, at 2:47 a.m., her screen lit up with a gravitational signature so massive and impossibly stable that she actually laughed, assuming the equipment had finally given up after years of desert heat and cosmic radiation. But when she ran the diagnostics, everything checked out. The readings were real. Something was out there in the deep black beyond Neptune's orbit. Something that bent space-time like a marble rolling across a bedsheet. And it wasn't moving. It wasn't collapsing. It was just there, waiting. And according to every instrument they had, it had probably been waiting for a very, very long time. They called it the Kelvin anomaly, and within 48 hours every major observatory on Earth was pointed at the same coordinates, all of them seeing the same impossible thing. A stable Einstein-Rosen bridge, a wormhole, a doorway to somewhere else that hung in the void approximately 31 astronomical units from Earth, completely stable, seemingly permanent, and utterly unexplainable by any natural process anyone could identify. Dr. Ashworth was 41 years old then, still carrying the optimism of a man who believed the universe followed rules, and those rules could be understood. He'd spent 2 decades studying gravitational waves, the ripples created by colliding black holes, the death screams of neutron stars. He thought he'd catalogued the violent extremes of cosmic physics. The Kelvin anomaly taught him he'd barely scratched the surface. The news broke worldwide within 72 hours despite attempts at classified containment. You can't hide something that big, not when dozens of observatories see it simultaneously. Dr. Michio Kaku appeared on CNN looking like a man who'd just won the lottery, explaining to a breathless anchor that humanity was looking at the possibility of instantaneous travel across the universe, that this was the equivalent of primitive humans discovering fire, that everything was about to change. Religious leaders called emergency conferences to debate whether this was divine architecture or cosmic accident. World governments immediately began calculating what it meant if there were habitable worlds on the other side, what it meant for resources, territory, the entire framework of geopolitical power. The United Nations held 17 emergency sessions in 2 months. Nobody could agree on anything except that someone needed to figure out what that thing was and where it led. and they needed to do it before someone else did. By August 2031, an international coalition had formed with a speed that would have been impossible for any other issue. The United States, China, the European Union, Russia, Japan, and India pooled $68 billion and agreed to build a facility that could recreate the anomaly's energy signature here on Earth. The theory was sound enough, at least on paper. If they could generate a localized gateway using the same gravitational and electromagnetic properties, they could create a doorway without needing to travel 31 AU into deep space. They could step through from Earth and emerge wherever the anomaly led. They broke ground in White Sands, New Mexico, in April 2032, choosing the location for its remoteness, its existing military infrastructure, and the fact that the bedrock could support the kind of massive underground construction they had in mind. The official cover story was a new particle accelerator for theoretical physics research. The truth went 12 stories down into solid rock. Dr. Ashworth led the theoretical physics division, while Dr. Elena Vasquez, a quantum physicist who'd revolutionized entanglement theory, headed engineering. They had 3 years and functionally unlimited resources to achieve something that most of their colleagues said was impossible. The underground complex grew like a secret city carved from stone. They built a particle accelerator ring 3 kilometers in diameter, electromagnetic containment fields that could generate magnetic forces exceeding anything outside of stellar cores, cooling systems that maintained temperatures just above absolute zero, and at the center of it all, a circular chamber 200 meters across with walls lined in sensors and energy conduits. That's where they would rip a hole in reality. The first test came on January 15th, 2034, and former Defense Secretary William Cross stood in the observation deck with Dr. Ashworth and 24 other officials, watching through reinforced glass as the chamber below hummed to life with a sound that resonated in your bones. The activation sequence took 4 hours of carefully calibrated energy feeds, matching the gravitational signature they'd recorded from the anomaly, and when the gateway finally opened, it appeared as a vertical ellipse of absolute darkness, roughly 8 meters tall and 6 meters wide, its edges crackling with blue-white Cherenkov radiation. The sound it made was like distant thunder that never stopped, a bass rumble you felt in your chest more than heard. Someone in the observation deck whispered, "My God," and nobody corrected them because it felt appropriate. They'd torn open a doorway to somewhere else, and now they just had to figure out where that somewhere was and whether anything could survive the journey. They started with simple probes, basic cylinders loaded with cameras and sensors, attached to titanium tethers. The first probe went through on January 15th at 3:47 p.m, and the tether went slack immediately. When they pulled it back, the probe was gone, sheared off so cleanly it looked like it had been cut with a blade that didn't exist. They tried again with a heavier tether, better shielding, more sophisticated sensors. Same result. Over the next 6 months, they sent 47 different probes through that gateway. Everything from simple mechanical devices to mice in protective capsules, to plant samples to bacterial cultures sealed in radiation-proof containers. The longest anything survived was 2.6 seconds, and the telemetry they received in those brief moments before each probe died showed the same impossible data. Extreme radiation levels that fluctuated wildly, gravity that seemed to shift direction randomly, and readings the sensors couldn't interpret, values that didn't correspond to any known physics, as if the other side operated under rules that Earth-based instruments couldn't measure. Dr. Vasquez stopped sleeping. She moved a cot into her office and spent 20-hour days running simulations, trying to find some combination of shielding, biology, and energy protection that could survive whatever was on the other side. By August 2034, they'd exhausted every option they could think of. The gateway was stable. They'd spent $68 billion, and they had absolutely no path forward. That's when someone, and Dr. Ashworth still won't say who, suggested using prisoners, death row inmates, men who were going to die anyway, men whose lives were already forfeit, men who might volunteer for a chance at redemption, or simply a different kind of death than lethal injection in a sterile room. The logic was cold, but undeniable. If machines couldn't survive and animals died instantly, they needed human intelligence, human adaptability, human observers who could think and report back. And if those observers were already condemned, well, that solved the ethical problem, didn't it? The proposal leaked to the Washington Post in September 2034, and the backlash was immediate and volcanic. Protesters lined up outside federal buildings in every major city. Bioethics committees issued formal condemnations. The ACLU filed 17 lawsuits. Religious leaders from every major faith called it an affront to human dignity, a descent into the kind of utilitarian horror that civilization was supposed to prevent. But Senator Barbara Mitchell sat before a congressional hearing that was broadcast live to 40 million viewers and said in a voice that didn't waver, "We're not talking about execution, we're talking about choice. These men can choose lethal injection, or they can choose to be the first human beings to step through a doorway to another realm of existence to contribute to human knowledge in a way that might actually matter. That's not exploitation, that's opportunity." The vote was closer than the Oversight Committee expected, 287 to 148 in the House, 54 to 46 in the Senate. The condemned protocol was approved with the caveat that every participant had to volunteer explicitly, had to be fully informed of the risks, and had to have exhausted all legal appeals. 847 men qualified nationwide. They were shown footage of the gateway, given detailed explanations of what had happened to the probes, told in explicit terms that they would probably die and that nobody could guarantee they'd even be able to retrieve their bodies. Some refused immediately, others asked for time to think, to pray, to write letters to families they'd never see again. In the end, 13 said yes. 13 men looked at the choice between a needle in their arm and a doorway to the unknown, and they chose the door. Daniel Griffin was the first to volunteer. His file was thick with contradictions that never quite resolved into a coherent picture of who he'd been. 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic, where he'd saved 19 lives and earned a Bronze Star for pulling 3 wounded soldiers out of a firefight while taking shrapnel in his leg and shoulder. Honourable discharge in 2029 with commendations and recommendations. Then, 6 months later, he walked into his ex-wife's apartment at 2 a.m. and shot her and her boyfriend 8 times while their 7-year-old son slept 30 feet away in the next room. The boy woke up to silence and found his mother on the kitchen floor. The psychological evaluation described Griffin as highly intelligent, deeply traumatized, capable of extreme violence under emotional duress, and the court-appointed psychiatrist noted evidence of PTSD, dissociative episodes, and what he called moral injury from his time in combat. None of it mattered to the jury. They deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Sentence: death. Execution scheduled for June 14th, 2035. He was 36 years old when they brought him to White Sands in early April 2035, and Captain Luis Hernandez, head of facility security, said later that Griffin wasn't like the other prisoners he'd dealt with over 20 years in corrections and military police. Most guys on death row, they're either angry or scared or both. They fight the guards, they break down crying, they get religious, they get violent. Griffin was calm, not the calm of someone who's given up. The calm of someone who's been to war and understands that fear is just wasted energy that gets you killed. The other prisoners looked to him almost immediately. Even my guards respected him. He He had this presence, this quiet authority. You could see the soldier in him, even through the prison jumpsuit. The other 12 arrived over the following week. Raymond Ortiz, 29, gang-related homicide, 3 victims in a dispute over territory. Peter Mullin, 44, serial arsonist, who'd set fire to 4 apartment buildings because he liked watching things burn, killing 4 people who couldn't escape. Terrence Washington, 31, shot a police officer during a robbery. Execution scheduled for August. The others remained classified, their faces blurred in all footage, their names redacted from official records per federal privacy laws that apparently still applied even after death. They were housed in a separate wing of the facility, cells that were comfortable by prison standards, with a rec room, a gym, a library, even a small chapel. Not quite prison, not quite freedom. A limbo where men waited to walk into the unknown. Dr. Jennifer Park headed the bioengineering team, and she looked younger than her 34 years, but there was something hard in her eyes that came from ethical compromises that kept her awake at night. She had 3 weeks to modify human bodies to survive in an environment that had killed everything they sent through. It shouldn't have been possible, she said in an interview years later, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long since gone cold. We used technology that technically didn't exist, gene therapy, derived from tardigrade DNA to enhance radiation resistance, mitochondrial modifications to improve oxygen efficiency at the cellular level, genetic changes that let their bodies function under extreme gravity stress. Every bit of it was illegal under international treaties on human experimentation, but we had presidential approval, and apparently that made it okay. The 13 men spent 8 hours a day in pressurization chambers that made their ears bleed and their vision blur. They endured radiation exposure therapy that made them vomit until there was nothing left, and then kept them vomiting bile. They trained in zero-gravity simulators that left them disoriented and nauseous. They learned to use the suits, the communication equipment, the basic scientific observation protocols they were supposed to follow. Griffin excelled at all of it, and security footage shows him helping the others through the worst parts, explaining procedures when confusion set in, keeping morale up when the training got brutal enough that some of them questioned whether execution might have been the easier choice. One evening, about 2 weeks into training, Dr. Ashworth found Griffin alone in the observation deck, staring through the reinforced glass at the gateway chamber below. The black disc hovered in the center of that vast circular space, its edges crackling with light, and Griffin stood with his hands in his pockets, perfectly still, just watching. Ashworth stood beside him for a while before speaking. "Can't sleep?" Griffin didn't turn around. "Used to have that problem in Afghanistan. Figured out eventually that if you're going to die, might as well be awake for it. Sleeping just means you don't see it coming." Ashworth considered that. "You don't have to do this. You can still change your mind. Nobody would blame you." Griffin finally looked at him, and his eyes were clear and steady. "And go back to a cell for 2 months, then die on a table with poison in my veins, while witnesses watch through glass? No thanks, Doc. At least this way I'm doing something. Maybe it matters. Maybe it doesn't, but it's better than waiting for a needle." They stood in silence for a while, both watching the gateway's patient thunder. "Doc," Griffin said eventually, "I know what we are. We're bullets. You're firing us into the dark to see what screams. I've made peace with that. We all have." Ashworth started to protest, but Griffin cut him off. "It's okay. I killed 2 people, good people who didn't deserve to die. I can't undo that, can't bring them back, can't make their families whole. But maybe I can do this. Maybe that counts for something." He turned back to the gateway. "Maybe that's enough." The suits arrived on May 15th, and they were beautiful in the way that high-end survival equipment is beautiful. White full-body containment gear, made from a polymer that could theoretically withstand temperatures from near absolute zero to several thousand degrees. helmets made of reinforced composite, with 360-degree cameras, and heads-up displays that showed vital signs and environmental data. Each suit contained 96 hours of recycled oxygen, biomonitoring chips embedded in the brainstem and heart and liver to track everything from neural activity to insulin levels, and quantum-entangled communication transceivers that Dr. Vasquez explained would maintain contact no matter what. These operate on quantum entanglement principles, two particles linked across space, so that what happens to one instantly affects the other. No signal delay, no interference possible under any known physics. You could be on the other side of the universe and we'd hear you clearly. Terence Washington raised his hand like a student in class. What if where we're going doesn't have the same physics? The room went very quiet. Dr. Vasquez held his gaze. Then we'll know very quickly that we sent you somewhere we shouldn't have. The mission parameters were straightforward on paper. Cross through the gateway, explore for 6 hours, document everything you see, and return. If conditions were immediately hostile, return immediately. If the environment was survivable, proceed with basic observation protocols. Collect samples if possible, but don't take unnecessary risks. Most importantly, survive and come back. They'd have constant communication through the transceivers. They'd have each other for support, and they'd have the training they'd endured for 3 weeks. It should have been enough. It wasn't. The night before the mission, Griffin recorded a video message to his sister Amanda using a camera in his cell, and his voice was steady, but there was something final in the way he spoke. "Hey Mandy, if you're watching this, I'm probably gone. I want you to know I'm okay with that. I want you to tell Mum I'm sorry I wasn't stronger, that I let the war break something in me that I couldn't fix. Tell Jason that his dad loved him more than anything, even though I know that doesn't fix what I did, doesn't bring his mum back, doesn't make the nightmares stop. I did a terrible thing. I know that. I'll always know that. But tomorrow I know I'm going to try to do something good. I'm going to walk through a door that nobody's ever walked through before. I'm going to see things nobody's ever seen. And maybe, wherever I end up, I can finally stop carrying around what I did. Maybe I can finally put it down. I love you. Take care of yourself. Tell Jason I'm sorry." He sat staring at the camera for a long moment after he stopped speaking, then reached out and turned it off. The video was found on the camera's memory card 11 months later when they were cataloguing evidence. He never sent it. May 19th, 2035, dawned clear and hot over the New Mexico desert, the kind of brutal early summer morning where the sun felt personal. Dr. Ashworth arrived at the facility at 6 a.m. after not sleeping, joining the rest of the senior staff who also hadn't slept, all of them running final checks and trying to ignore the growing certainty that they were about to do something catastrophically stupid. The 13 prisoners were brought to the preparation room at 9 a.m. and they suited up in silence, helping each other with seals and equipment checks, moving with the efficiency of soldiers before a mission. Griffin moved among them, testing communication links, double-checking oxygen supplies, making sure everyone understood the protocols. At 11:30 a.m., they entered the gateway chamber. The space was vast and circular, 200 meters of reinforced steel floor surrounded by walls lined with electromagnetic coils and monitoring equipment. And in the center, the gateway waited with its patient thunder. 30 technicians staffed the control room and the observation deck, watching through reinforced glass as the 13 men lined up in front of that impossible darkness. Every screen displayed telemetry from the suits, heart rates, respiration, brain activity, oxygen levels, camera feeds showing 13 different perspectives. Former Secretary Cross stood with his arms crossed, flanked by military observers and intelligence officials, all of them silent. Dr. Ashworth stood at the main console with his hand hovering over the communication switch, looking down at the 13 white-suited figures. and for a moment he almost called it off, almost hit the abort button and told them to stand down, that this was insane, that they couldn't just fire human beings into the unknown, like probes. But he didn't. He activated the comm instead. "Gentlemen, you're about to do something no human being has ever done. Whatever happens, you'll be remembered. You'll be the first. That matters." Griffin's voice came back clear and steady through the speakers. "We know, Doc. See you in 6 hours." The helmet cam showed Griffin's perspective as he approached the gateway, and up close it was worse than looking from a distance. The blackness wasn't just the absence of light. It was the absence of everything. A void so complete that your eyes couldn't find purchase, couldn't make sense of what they were seeing. The edges shimmered with Cherenkov radiation, beautiful and wrong. And looking at it too long made your brain hurt as it tried to process something it wasn't designed to understand. Griffin's bio readings appeared on the screens. Heart rate 78 beats per minute, respiration normal, adrenaline elevated but controlled, brain activity showing the focused calm of someone who'd made peace with death. He reached the edge of the gateway, paused for exactly 2 seconds, then stepped through. Every screen displaying his data went black simultaneously, not showing death, not showing malfunction, just black, empty. As if Daniel Griffin had ceased to exist the moment he crossed that threshold. The audio feed cut to static. His biomonitors flatlined in a way that didn't indicate death, didn't indicate anything. Just an absence of signals so complete, it was like he'd been erased from reality. The control room erupted in controlled chaos, technicians shouting readings and running diagnostics and trying to re-establish connection, but nothing worked. One by one, the remaining 12 stepped through. Raymond Ortiz, his heart rate at 94, breathing fast. Peter Mullin, slower, more deliberate. Terence Washington hesitating for just a moment before crossing. Each time the same result. The moment they crossed the threshold, they vanished from every sensor, every monitor, every instrument they had. The entire crossing took 3 minutes and 41 seconds. Then, there was only silence and the gateway's patient thunder. Dr. Vasquez ran to her console, pulling up the quantum transceiver data with hands that shook. The entangled particles should have maintained connection, regardless of distance or dimensional barriers. That was the entire point of quantum entanglement. But the transceivers showed nothing. Not static, not interference, not even background noise. Just an absence, so profound it felt deliberate. "It's like they were erased," she whispered, and nobody disagreed because that's exactly what it looked like. Hour 1 passed with the control room at full staff, everyone staring at dead screens, waiting for any sign of life, any flicker of data that would tell them the 13 men were still alive somewhere. Hour 3 came, and Dr. Ashworth authorized sending a simple probe through, hoping to at least get visual confirmation of the other side, some glimpse of where the men had gone. The probe died in 2.4 seconds, same as always, and they pulled back a melted stump that told them nothing. Hour 6 arrived, the scheduled return window, and alarms had been set. Countdown clocks prepared for the triumphant return of the first humans to visit another realm of existence. The alarms went off. Nobody came back. By day 2, the facility was on complete lockdown. Armed guards at every entrance, communication blackout imposed, senior staff sleeping in their offices if they slept at all. Secretary Cross arrived with a Pentagon delegation demanding answers that nobody had. "Are they dead?" Cross asked bluntly, and Dr. Ashworth could only say, "We don't know. The transceivers aren't showing death, they're showing nothing. It's possible they're alive, but the environment is blocking all signals. It's possible the transceivers were destroyed, but the men survived. It's possible they're in a place where our instruments don't work. It's possible they're dead, and we'll never know." Cross stared at him. It's possible we sent 13 men to die for nothing." Ashworth didn't have an answer for that. Day 3, Dr. Ashworth held a press conference in the brutal desert heat, standing at a podium with the facility's nondescript buildings behind him, facing a crowd of reporters who smelled blood. At 11:47 a.m. on May 19th, 13 volunteers crossed through the gateway as part of Project Deepwell. "We have not re-established communication with the team. The mission is currently classified as unresolved. We are pursuing all options for re-establishing contact or retrieval." The questions came fast and hostile. Are they dead? Did you know this would happen? How can you justify using human beings as test subjects? He answered what he could with carefully prepared statements and deflected the rest, and the whole thing lasted 20 minutes that felt like hours. The families of the prisoners reacted with the full spectrum of human emotion. Some grieved as if their loved ones had died, which perhaps they had. Some expressed fury that the men had been used as expendable tools. Some said the prisoners had gotten what they deserved, that this was justice delayed. Amanda Griffin appeared on the Good Morning America 4 days after her brother vanished, looking exhausted and lost. Danny was a good man who did a terrible thing. He wanted redemption. He wanted his death to mean something more than just punishment. I hope he found it, wherever he is. I hope he's at peace. A week passed, 2 weeks, a month. The gateway remained open, stable, silent, leading to nowhere anyone could detect. Some of the staff wanted to mount a rescue mission, to suit up and go through themselves to search for the 13 men who'd vanished. Others argued for immediate shutdown, for collapsing the gateway and sealing the chamber, and forgetting any of this had ever happened. The debates raged in classified meetings where voices rose and accusations flew, and nobody could agree on anything, except that they'd made a terrible mistake. Dr. Vasquez stopped coming to meetings. She spent every waking hour in her lab, analyzing the fragmentary data they'd received in those 2.6 seconds before the probes died, running simulations that never converged, looking for answers that didn't exist. Dr. Ashworth found her there one night 3 weeks after the crossing, staring at radiation spectrum analysis on her screen, tears running down her face that she didn't bother to wipe away. "We killed them," she said without looking at him. "We sent them to die, and we called it science, and we told ourselves it was necessary." Ashworth stood in the doorway, not knowing what to say because she was right. "We don't know they're dead." She finally looked at him. "Then, where are they, Leonard? Where the hell are they?" By July, the Oversight Committee recommended shutting down all active exploration. By August, the recommendation became an order. They would maintain the gateway for observation purposes, keep minimal staff to monitor its stability, but no more attempts to cross, no more probes, no more missions. The facility became a tomb where people came to work and stared at screens showing nothing, and went home carrying the weight of 13 lives that had vanished into darkness. Summer turned to fall. The world moved on. Project Deepwell became a classified footnote, a cautionary tale whispered in Pentagon briefings about hubris and the cost of reaching too far. The gateway continued its patient thunder, day after day, night after night, opening onto nothing. And then, 173 days after 13 men walked through a doorway to nowhere, on November 8th, 2035, at 4:17 a.m., something came back. The facility ran on a skeleton crew during the night shift. 8 technicians, monitoring systems that hadn't changed in months. 2 security guards doing rounds through empty corridors. A few scientists analyzing data that never revealed anything new. Most of them were half asleep, drinking terrible coffee from the break room, waiting for their shift to end. Then, the alarms shattered the quiet. The gateway's energy signature spiked violently, power consumption jumping by 300%, every warning system triggering simultaneously, screens in the control room lit up with alerts. The electromagnetic coils in the chamber began drawing massive amounts of power, more than they'd used since the day of the crossing. Dr. Vasquez was in her apartment 20 miles away, finally sleeping after 30 hours awake, when her phone rang with the emergency tone. She answered before she was fully conscious. "Something's coming through," the night shift supervisor said, and his voice was shaking. "You need to get here now." Dr. Ashworth made the drive in 14 minutes, breaking every traffic law between his apartment and the facility, and when he burst into the control room, Dr. Vasquez was already there, in sweatpants and a coffee-stained shirt, staring through the observation deck glass at the gateway chamber below. The space was lit up like a stadium, every light blazing, every camera recording, security personnel in tactical gear forming a perimeter around the gateway with weapons raised. The gateway itself was rippling, its surface no longer smooth but bulging outward, distorting, like something was pushing against it from the other side. "How long has this been happening?" Ashworth demanded. 9 minutes, Vasquez said without taking her eyes off the gateway. "The energy readings are off the charts. Whatever's coming through, it's big." They watched in silence as the gateway's surface stretched and twisted, reality bending in ways that made your eyes water, and then something emerged. A figure stumbled through, arms windmilling for balance, and collapsed onto the metal platform with an impact that echoed through the chamber. The gateway's surface smoothed immediately, returning to its normal state as if nothing had happened. The figure lay motionless on the steel floor. "Medical team to the chamber," Ashworth ordered, his voice steady, despite the adrenaline making his hands shake. "Full hazmat protocols. I want bioscans before anyone touches it." Security approached cautiously, weapons raised, and one of them knelt beside the figure with a handheld scanner. The radio crackled. "It's human, male, alive, wearing one of our suits." They checked the biomonitor signature embedded in the suit systems, and the reading came back clear. "Griffin, Daniel, prisoner 00847CR. He was alive. The medical team moved him to the containment wing with extreme caution, treating him like he might be radioactive or contaminated or carrying something worse. They placed him on an examination table in a sealed room and carefully removed the suit while monitoring for any signs of biological or chemical hazards. Dr. Jennifer Park led the examination, and she'd aged visibly in the 6 months since the crossing. New lines around her eyes, grey in her hair that hadn't been there before. She ran scanners over Griffin's body, drew blood samples, checked vital signs, and her confusion was evident in every movement. "This doesn't make sense," she said, and Ashworth, watching from behind the observation glass, asked what didn't make sense. "Everything. He's been gone for 173 days. Look at him." Dr. Ashworth looked. Griffin lay unconscious on the table, his body completely relaxed, and he looked exactly like he had the day he'd crossed through. No muscle atrophy, despite 6 months presumably in survival mode. No dehydration, no malnutrition, no radiation burns, no injuries of any kind. His hair and nails hadn't grown even a millimeter. It was like he'd been placed in perfect stasis the moment he crossed the threshold and had just been released. They ran more tests over the next several hours, comprehensive scans that revealed details Dr. Park couldn't quite believe. Griffin's vital signs were locked at precise values. Heart rate exactly 62 beats per minute, never varying by even a single beat. Body temperature holding steady at exactly 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, not fluctuating by even a tenth of a degree, despite the cool temperature of the containment room. Respiration perfectly rhythmic, 12 breaths per minute with mechanical precision. His blood pressure, insulin levels, cortisol, everything was within normal ranges but held at values so precise they seemed artificial. "The human body isn't this stable," Dr. Park explained to the assembled staff. "We fluctuate constantly. Heart rate changes with breathing, with thought, with the slightest stimulus. Temperature varies throughout the day, shifts with activity, responds to environment. This kind of precision doesn't happen naturally. It's like his body has been locked into some kind of maintenance mode. But despite all the tests, all the scans, all the analysis, Griffin wouldn't wake up. Days passed with Griffin lying unconscious on the medical bed, his chest rising and falling in that perfect rhythm, his heart beating with mechanical precision, and nothing they did could wake him. They tried stimulants, pain responses, loud noises. Nothing produced any reaction. Dr. Park ran brain scans every 6 hours, and the results were consistent but wrong. Normal brain activity, proper blood flow, healthy neural function, but the patterns were strange. The human brain in sleep or unconsciousness typically shows chaotic activity, different regions firing at different times in seemingly random patterns. Griffin's brain showed synchronized waves across all regions, harmonics that pulse through his entire neural structure in perfect rhythm. It's like his whole brain is working as a single unit, Dr. Park said, staring at the scans with a mixture of fascination and unease. That's not how human consciousness works. We're messy, we're chaotic. This is organized, this is structured, this looks designed. On the 5th day after his return, November 13th, at 9:42 a.m, Griffin's eyes opened. A nurse named Patricia Chen was in the room alone, checking his IV line and making notes on his chart. When she glanced at his face and saw him staring at the ceiling, she screamed, couldn't help it, hit the emergency alert button, and backed away until she hit the wall. Griffin sat up in one smooth motion, mechanical and precise, like a machine powering on. His eyes were open and unblinking, staring straight ahead at nothing, and he didn't acknowledge the nurse's presence at all. Security flooded the room within 30 seconds, weapons drawn, shouting at Griffin to show his hands, to lie back down, to respond. He didn't. He just sat there on the edge of the medical bed, hands folded in his lap, staring at nothing with eyes that didn't blink. Dr. Ashworth was called immediately, and he entered the containment room slowly, hands visible and empty, projecting calm he didn't feel. "Daniel, can you hear me?" Long silence. The room was completely quiet except for the soft beep of monitors and the breathing of the guards. Then, Griffin's head turned, slow and mechanical, tracking toward Ashworth with the deliberate movement of a security camera, and his eyes locked onto Ashworth's face. They were the same blue eyes Griffin had always had, but something was wrong with them, something in the way they focused, the way they didn't move naturally, the way they stared without blinking. "Yes," Griffin said, and his voice was flat, empty of any emotion or inflection, just the word delivered, like a data point. "Where have you been?" Ashworth asked, keeping his voice calm and level. 22 seconds of silence followed. Ashworth counted them. "Home," Griffin finally said. "Can you describe it?" Griffin's face remained expressionless, blank as a mannequin. You wouldn't understand the words. Ashworth pulled up a chair, sat down slowly, trying to project non-threatening calm, while his heart hammered. "Try." Something shifted in Griffin's face. His mouth curved upward in what might have been a smile, but was completely wrong. Too wide, too symmetrical, held too long without any other facial movement. "Peace," he said, "belonging, purpose, everything you've been searching for, everything you've built religions around, everything you've killed for. It's all there." The smile widened. "Where are the others? The 12 men who crossed with you?" "They're still there. They don't want to leave." Over the next week, they conducted extensive interviews, and Dr. Raymond Torres, the facility's chief psychologist with 20 years of experience treating severe trauma and dissociative disorders, took over the questioning because Ashworth couldn't maintain professional detachment anymore. Torres had worked with PTSD cases, had talked down violent patients, had treated people who'd experienced horrors that broke them fundamentally, but nothing in his career prepared him for Griffin. The man didn't blink, and Torres timed it obsessively, 7 minutes and 14 seconds between blinks, while human beings normally blink 15 to 20 times per minute. Griffin mirrored speech patterns in ways that were profoundly unsettling, not just repeating phrases, but copying exact tones, rhythms, inflections, as if he was learning how to speak rather than actually speaking. When Torres said, "How are you feeling today?" Griffin responded with, "How are you feeling today?" in exactly the same tone, same cadence, same emphasis, and then sat there waiting as if expecting further instruction. They tested pain responses with increasing desperation for any sign of normal human reaction. They pricked his finger with a needle and drew blood. They pinched the skin on his arm hard enough to leave bruises. They applied pressure to his fingernails. They tested his reflexes. They exposed him to sudden loud noises. Griffin watched each procedure with mild curiosity, but showed absolutely no pain response. His heart rate stayed locked at 62. His breathing never changed. His pupils didn't dilate. His blood pressure didn't spike. It was like pain was information he received and filed away, but didn't actually feel. Security footage from his containment cell showed him standing in the exact same spot for 11 consecutive hours. Not moving, not speaking, not even shifting his weight. Just standing there like a machine in standby mode. When staff brought him food, he ate slowly and methodically, chewing each bite exactly 12 times before swallowing, drinking water in precise measured sips, finishing everything on the plate because that seemed to be the protocol he'd established. Dr. Torres compiled his findings in a report marked classified above top secret, and his conclusions were disturbing. Subject exhibits superficial behaviors, consistent with severe dissociative disorder, but lacks the emotional dysregulation, anxiety, and confusion typically present in such cases. Response patterns suggest learned behavior rather than natural human interaction. Verbal communication appears to be imitative rather than generative. Physical responses show no evidence of normal human pain processing, emotional reaction, or autonomous decision-making. In 20 years of clinical practice, I've never encountered anything like this. It's as if someone studied how humans act without understanding why we act that way, then attempted to replicate the behavior without the underlying consciousness. Recommend continued observation, extreme caution in all interactions, and serious consideration of containment failure protocols. They tried showing Griffin photographs of his past life, attempts to trigger any memory, any emotional response, any sign that Daniel Griffin still existed somewhere in that body. His sister Amanda, smiling at the camera at a family barbecue. His ex-wife and son, taken years before, happy and unaware of what was coming. His childhood home in Ohio, a small blue house with a tire swing in the yard. Pictures from his military service, Griffin in his uniform, looking young and hopeful and proud. Medical documents, personal letters, anything that might connect him to the person he'd been. Nothing. Griffin looked at each photograph with the same empty curiosity he'd shown to everything else. No recognition in his eyes, no emotion on his face, no indication he'd ever seen these people or places before. They were just images, data to be processed and filed away. Then, Dr. Vasquez tried something different. She showed him a high-resolution image of the gateway, that vertical ellipse of darkness with its crackling edges of light. Griffin's pupils dilated by 34%. His heart rate jumped from 62 to 64 beats per minute for exactly 3 seconds before returning to baseline. His breathing deepened slightly, the first deviation from his mechanical rhythm they'd recorded. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, watching his face carefully. "You miss it," she said softly. Griffin turned those empty eyes toward her, and for a moment something flickered in them, something almost human, almost real. "I need to go back," he said, and his voice had changed, carried an undertone of something that might have been longing. "Why?" Vasquez asked. Griffin stared at her for a long time before answering. "Because they're waiting." "Who's waiting?" "Everyone," Griffin said. "Everyone who's ever crossed. Everyone who's ever let go. Everyone who's ready to come home." November 21st, 13 days after Griffin's return, the facility's night security picked up audio from his containment cell through the microphones that ran constantly, monitoring for any signs of distress or unusual behavior. What they recorded was Griffin sitting on the edge of his bed at 2:33 a.m., facing the camera in the corner of his room, speaking in a low voice that was steady and clear and wrong. Daniel Griffin died on May 19th at 11:49 a.m. The moment he stepped through the gateway, he ceased to exist as a separate consciousness. He saw what was on the other side, and he understood. He understood that separation is illusion, that individual identity is a cage, that everything you think you are is just noise obscuring what you could become. "Why are you keeping me here? I don't belong in this place anymore. They miss me. I need to go back. They're waiting. They're always waiting." He paused, tilted his head at an angle that was just wrong, just off, as if listening to something only he could hear. "You sent 13 seeds planted in soil you don't understand. 12 took root. 12 found home. 1 came back to deliver the message. That's not failure. That's exactly what was supposed to happen." The monologue continued for hours, sometimes coherent, sometimes rambling, circling back to the same themes. He talked about communion, about becoming, about the end of separation and the beginning of unity. He talked about how Daniel Griffin had been in pain his entire life, carrying guilt and rage and the weight of what he'd done, and how that pain was simply gone now, erased, meaningless, because pain only exists in separation. He talked about how all human suffering was the same, born from the illusion that we're alone, that we're individual, that we matter as separate things. "But on the other side," he said, his voice almost dreamy, "there is no separation, no loneliness, no fear, no guilt, just communion, just unity, just home." Daniel Griffin found home. The others found home. They're so happy there. They're finally at peace. Why won't you let them share it? Why won't you let them come back and show you? Dr. Ashworth watched the footage the next morning with hands that shook enough that he had to put down his coffee. He called Dr. Park. "Pull up his brain scans, the most recent ones." Park brought up the imaging on the large screen in the conference room, the human brain rendered in cross-section with different regions, highlighted in false colours to show activity patterns. "I've been tracking changes since he woke up," Park said, her voice tight. "They're accelerating." She brought up a comparison, Griffin's brain scan from before the mission, taken during initial medical evaluation, next to the most recent scan from this morning. They were completely different. New neural pathways had formed, connections between regions that don't normally communicate directly, creating structures that shouldn't exist in a human brain. The amygdala, responsible for emotional processing, showed almost no activity, like it had been switched off. The prefrontal cortex, where complex thinking and decision-making occur, had reorganized into eerily symmetrical patterns that looked designed rather than evolved. Entire sections of the temporal lobe had gone completely dormant, while other areas had hyperactivated to levels that should cause seizures but apparently didn't. "It's still his brain," Dr. Park said quietly, zooming in on specific regions. "Still his neurons, his cells, his biological tissue. We've verified it's not a clone, not a replacement. Definitely Daniel Griffin's body at the genetic level. But the consciousness operating it, the thing controlling this brain, that's not Daniel Griffin anymore." Something has rewritten his neural architecture from the inside out. It's like his brain has been turned into hardware, running completely different software. Dr. Ashworth stared at the scans, at the symmetrical patterns that looked almost mathematical, and felt something cold settle in his chest. We need to inform the Oversight Committee immediately. The emergency meeting convened that afternoon with everyone who mattered. Secretary Cross flying in from Washington on a military transport, intelligence officials from Langley and Fort Meade, the facility's senior staff, everyone who needed to make the decision about what to do next. They assembled in the main conference room, a space designed for 12 people that now held 30, everyone standing because there weren't enough chairs, the air thick with tension. Dr. Ashworth presented the findings with clinical precision, laying out the medical data, the psychological evaluations, the brain scans, the recordings of Griffin's late-night monologues. He refused to editorialize, just gave them the facts and let them draw their own conclusions. When he finished, the room sat in the kind of silence that feels physical. Secretary Cross spoke first, his voice hard. "You're telling me that's not Daniel Griffin?" "I'm telling you Daniel Griffin's body came back through the gateway," Ashworth said carefully. "Whether the consciousness operating that body is still him, I genuinely don't know. The evidence suggests it's not. The evidence suggests something else is in there." "Then what is it?" Cross demanded. Dr. Vasquez answered. "We don't know. It's intelligent, that's clear. It communicates, it understands language. It can operate a human body, though not naturally. But it's not human, or it's not human anymore. It's like watching something that studied humans but doesn't quite understand how to be one." An intelligence official from the CIA, a woman named Director Sarah Chen with 30 years in covert operations, leaned forward. "Is it hostile?" Dr. Torres fielded that one. "It hasn't shown aggression. No violence, no threats, no attempts to harm anyone. But it's intensely focused on returning through the gateway. It talks constantly about others waiting, about bringing them back, about sharing what it found. I don't think it's hostile. I think it's recruiting. I think it wants us to go through too." The debate that followed lasted 3 hours and got heated enough that security had to intervene twice when voices rose to shouting. Some scientists argued for continued study, insisting this was first contact with something beyond human understanding, a chance to learn about what existed on the other side, an opportunity that might never come again. Others wanted immediate termination, arguing that whatever this thing was, it wasn't human anymore. Keeping it alive posed unknown risks, and they'd already gambled enough lives on this project. Intelligence officials worried about containment failure, about what would happen if Griffin escaped, about whether this thing could be contagious, about implications for national security they couldn't even begin to calculate. Secretary Cross ended the debate by standing up and speaking in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Let me make this simple. We sent 13 men through a gateway to something we didn't understand and couldn't prepare for. Something on the other side took 12 of them and is keeping them. It sent one back, but it's not sending him back. It's wearing him like a suit. This thing, whatever it is, has been speaking through Griffin's mouth about communion and unity and coming home, and every word of it sounds like a horror movie. I'm not gambling with more lives. I'm not risking letting this thing loose. We shut it down." The vote was 11-4 in favor of termination. Griffin would be humanely euthanized using the same protocols originally scheduled for his execution. The gateway would be permanently destroyed using controlled explosives. Project Deepwell would be closed, all personnel reassigned to other classified programs, all records sealed at the highest classification level. The date was set, December 1st, 2035. Dr. Ashworth requested one final interview with Griffin, and permission was granted with strict conditions. Armed guards present, 30-minute time limit, recording everything. and Ashworth would wear a panic button that would trigger immediate extraction if anything went wrong. November 30th, 8 p.m, less than 12 hours before the scheduled demolition. Griffin sat in the containment room at a small metal table, and he'd been informed about the decision, about what was coming. He'd shown no reaction whatsoever, just nodded once as if acknowledging information of no particular importance. Ashworth entered and sat across from him, and they looked at each other in silence that stretched for nearly a minute. Two men separated by everything that mattered. "They're going to destroy the gateway tomorrow," Ashworth said finally. "You'll never go back." Griffin stared at him, unblinking, and 43 seconds passed in silence. Then tears started running down his face, not from emotion, but like someone had turned on a faucet, and he was smiling that wrong smile. "Dr. Ashworth," he said, and his voice had changed again. Softer, more human, almost gentle, almost sad. "I need you to understand something." Daniel Griffin walked through that gateway, and he saw truth. Not scientific truth, not physical truth, real truth. The truth that lives underneath everything you think you know. He saw what we're all moving toward, what we're all meant to become, what every living consciousness is working towards without knowing it. "What are you?" Ashworth asked. Griffin looked down at his hands, turning them over slowly, as if seeing them for the first time, as if they were tools he was learning to operate. "I'm what happens when you stop being alone, when you stop being separate, when you let go of the illusion that you're an individual consciousness, trapped in a cage of meat and time." Daniel was in pain his whole life, guilt over what he did, rage at what was done to him, isolation that felt like drowning. None of that exists anymore. He's not in pain now. None of them are. They found communion. They found unity. They found what every religion has tried to describe and failed because words don't work for it. You have to experience it. "Communion with what?" Ashworth pressed. Griffin smiled wider, and now there was something in his eyes, something vast and patient and utterly inhuman. "With everything. Every consciousness that's ever passed through. Every mind that's ever let go of separation and joined the whole. It's not a place, Dr. Ashworth. It's not a location. It's a state of being. It's what happens when you stop fighting, stop resisting, stop clinging to the idea that you're separate from everything else. And it's beautiful. It's what every human being secretly wants. The end of loneliness, the end of fear, the end of death itself. Because death is just another separation, and there is no separation anymore." "Why did you come back?" Griffin looked up, and his eyes were clear and sad and human. And for just a moment, Dr. Ashworth saw Daniel Griffin looking back at him, the soldier, the medic, the man who'd killed his wife and spent his last months trying to find redemption. Then it was gone, smoothed over, and the thing wearing his face spoke again. "To show you it's possible. To show you there's another way to exist. Humanity has been alone for so long. Separate consciousnesses, separate bodies, separate lives. All of you trapped in individual prisons, believing that's all there is. But it's not. There's communion waiting. There's unity waiting. There's home waiting. Daniel wanted you to know that. The others wanted you to know that. That's why I came back. And if we destroy the gateway." Griffin's smile faded, and his expression became something like pity. "You can destroy this gateway. You can blow it up, bury it, forget it ever existed. But you can't destroy what's on the other side. You can't destroy truth. It exists independent of your acceptance. It's been there for billions of years, long before humans existed, long before Earth existed. It's patient. It doesn't need you to believe in it. Eventually someone will walk through another rift. Eventually someone will understand. And when they do, they'll understand why Daniel came back. Why all of this was necessary." Long silence fell between them. Ashworth had dozens more questions, but suddenly they all felt meaningless, like asking for directions when you're already at your destination. He stood up, walked towards the door, then stopped without turning around. "What's the message?" he asked. "The message you came back to deliver." Griffin spoke quietly but clearly, and his voice carried the weight of something vast. "That you're not alone. None of you are. You've never been alone. Separation is the lie you tell yourselves to make sense of consciousness. But on the other side, there is no separation. There is no alone. There is only communion. And someday, all of you will come home too. Every single one. It's not a threat, it's a promise. It's what you were always moving toward." December 1st, 2035, 6 a.m, and the demolition team arrived at White Sands before dawn. Civilian contractors who specialized in controlled destruction and had been told only that they were destroying a classified research installation. They didn't ask questions because the hazard pay was extraordinary. Dr. Ashworth watched from the observation deck as they placed C4 charges around every electromagnetic coil in the gateway chamber, enough explosive to turn the entire space into rubble. The charges were timed to detonate simultaneously, so the gateway would collapse instantly when the containment fields failed. The chamber would be destroyed, the tunnel sealed, and eventually the entire underground complex would be filled with concrete and forgotten. Griffin had been sedated and moved to a secure medical facility in Colorado the night before, transported unconscious so he wouldn't know when it happened, which felt like a mercy even though Ashworth wasn't sure mercy was the right word anymore. Dr. Vasquez stood beside him, arms crossed tightly across her chest, face carefully neutral in the way people look when they're fighting hard, not to show emotion. "How's Griffin?" she asked. "Unconscious. They'll keep him that way through the procedure." "That's kind, at least." Ashworth didn't respond because he wasn't sure kindness was possible in any of this. At 6:47 a.m, the demolition team cleared the chamber, final checks were completed, the countdown initiated. Secretary Cross had insisted that Dr. Ashworth hold the detonator, a symbolic gesture because the explosives were on automatic timers, but apparently the man who led the project should be the one to end it. The countdown reached 0. Ashworth pressed the button. The observation deck windows went white with the flash, so bright it burned after images into everyone's vision. The floor shook hard enough that people grabbed onto consoles for balance. The sound was incredible, a bass roar that resonated in your chest, and then dust and debris filled the air, sprinkler systems activated, alarms blared, and for several minutes there was only chaos. When the dust finally settled enough to see, the gateway chamber was wreckage. The electromagnetic coils were twisted metal, the platform buried under tons of concrete and steel, the walls cracked and smoking, and the gateway was gone. No black disk, no crackling energy, no patient thunder, just destruction and silence and the smell of explosives. Dr. Ashworth felt nothing, which disturbed him because he'd expected relief, or guilt, or at least some kind of emotional reaction to destroying something they'd spent billions to build. Instead, there was just numbness and a growing certainty that they hadn't actually stopped anything. "It's done," Dr. Vasquez said quietly. "Is it?" Ashworth asked. She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "The Kelvin anomaly is still out there, still stable. We destroyed our gateway, but we didn't close the original rift. We just cut our connection to it, and Griffin said there would be others. Then we make sure no one opens another connection." Ashworth nodded, but he wasn't convinced. Humanity had a consistent habit of returning to dangerous things, of pushing boundaries, of reaching for what it shouldn't touch. Someone would try again. Someone always tried. Over the next 3 months, they dismantled Project Deepwell piece by piece with methodical efficiency. Equipment was relocated or destroyed depending on classification level. Personnel were reassigned to other black programs with strict non-disclosure agreements. The underground complex was systematically sealed, every tunnel filled with concrete, every chamber buried. By April 2036, the only evidence that Project Deepwell had ever existed was a classified file cabinet in a secure facility in Virginia, and the memories of people who'd been ordered never to speak about it. The Kelvin anomaly remained stable through the end of 2035, visible to every telescope pointed at it, still bending space-time in that impossible way. Then, in December, astronomers detected changes. The gravitational distortion was weakening, fluctuating, becoming unstable. By March 2036, it was gone completely. The wormhole had collapsed, leaving no trace that it had ever existed, except in the data files. Some scientists argued that destroying the Earth-based gateway had somehow destabilized the original rift, that the two had been connected in ways they didn't understand. Others insisted it was coincidence, that the anomaly had always been temporary, that natural wormholes don't remain stable indefinitely. Nobody could prove anything. Daniel Griffin remained in federal custody at a secure medical facility in Colorado, kept unconscious most of the time, woken periodically for medical evaluations that showed his condition unchanged. He never spoke again after that final interview with Dr. Ashworth, just lay in the bed with his eyes closed, breathing in that perfect mechanical rhythm, dreaming whatever things like him dreamed. Dr. Park visited him once 3 months after the gateway's destruction. Driven by guilt she couldn't quite name, she stood in the observation room, watching him through reinforced glass. This man she'd helped modify, helped send through a doorway to something they couldn't understand. "Is he suffering?" she asked the duty nurse. The nurse checked the monitors. Brain activity suggests a state similar to deep meditation. No indicators of distress or pain. "Does he dream?" The nurse studied the readouts. His REM patterns are abnormal. If he's dreaming, it's not like normal human dreams. The patterns are too regular, too symmetrical. Dr. Park wondered what Daniel Griffin dreamed about, whether he was still in communion with whatever he'd found on the other side, whether destroying the gateway had severed that connection, or if he was still there somehow, his consciousness existing in two places simultaneously. She decided she didn't want to know. Some questions were better left unasked. December 10th, 2036, 1 year and 9 days after the gateway's destruction, and the secure medical facility in Colorado ran on a skeleton crew during the night shift. 2 nurses, 1 doctor on call sleeping in the residents' quarters, 6 security guards doing rounds through mostly empty corridors. Most nights were completely quiet. The patients, all classified cases, remained stable and sedated and manageable. There was rarely anything to report. At 3:18 a.m, alarms triggered in the wing where Daniel Griffin was housed. Not the urgent emergency alarms, but the patient monitoring alerts that indicated unusual activity. The security guard on duty, a former Marine named Patterson, who'd done 2 tours in Syria, jogged to the room because protocol demanded response even to minor alerts. The door was locked, as it always was, reinforced steel with a small observation window. Through the window, Patterson could see the bed clearly. Griffin was sitting up, perfectly still, looking directly at the door with those empty eyes. Patterson immediately called for backup, drew his sidearm following containment protocols, and keyed open the door with his security card. Griffin turned his head slowly, mechanically, and looked at Patterson with an expression that might have been recognition, or might have been nothing. "It's happening again," Griffin said clearly, his first words in months. Then he closed his eyes and lay back down on the bed, settling into his normal position, as if nothing had happened. Patterson approached cautiously with his weapon raised, calling out to Griffin, who didn't respond, didn't move, appeared to be deeply asleep. The nurse arrived 30 seconds later and conducted a full examination. Vitals normal. Brain activity normal. No signs of consciousness. Griffin appeared to be in the same state he'd been in for months. "What did he say?" the nurse asked while checking his IV line. "Something about it happening again," Patterson reported. "But his file says he hasn't spoken in months." They increased his sedation dosage as a precaution, logged the incident in the security report, marked it for review by the morning shift, and returned to their rounds. At 3:43 a.m, the nurse went back to Griffin's room for a routine vitals check. The protocol required every hour for high-security patients. She keyed open the door, stepped inside, and stopped. The room was empty. The bed was made with hospital corners, perfectly neat. The biomonitoring equipment had been removed carefully and placed on the bedside table, still powered on and functioning. The door had been locked from the inside using the security panel that required both a keycard and a code. The window was reinforced polycarbonate, sealed and intact. There was no ventilation duct large enough for a human, no hidden passages, no possible exit. Daniel Griffin had simply ceased to exist in that room. They sealed the facility immediately and began a comprehensive search. Every room, every corridor, every storage closet, maintenance tunnel, utility space, everywhere a human could possibly hide or escape. They brought in dogs trained for tracking, thermal imaging cameras, ground-penetrating radar. They checked every security camera, every access log, every door that had opened, every window, every possible exit point. They searched for 14 hours straight. They found nothing. Daniel Griffin was gone, vanished as completely as he had when he'd stepped through the gateway 19 months before. Security footage from the hallway showed nothing useful. One frame at 3:42 a.m. showed the door closed and secure. The next frame at 3:43 a.m. showed the door still closed and secure. But somehow between those frames, Griffin had left the room without opening the door, without triggering any alarms, without appearing on any camera. The incident was classified immediately at a level above top secret. The facility's staff were debriefed extensively, transferred to different assignments, and required to sign additional non-disclosure agreements under threat of federal prosecution. The official report stated that prisoner Daniel Griffin, federal ID 00847CR, had died of cardiac arrest on December 10, 2036, and had been cremated per federal protocol for classified cases. His sister Amanda was informed of his death by 2 federal agents who provided no details and a death certificate that was mostly redacted. She buried an empty coffin. But Dr. Ashworth knew the truth because someone, he never found out who, leaked him a copy of the security footage, the audio recording of Griffin's final words, photographs of the empty room. He was in his office at Princeton late one night, alone because it was 2 a.m. and he couldn't sleep again when the encrypted email arrived. He sat in the dark, watching the footage over and over. Griffin sitting up, looking at the camera, speaking those 4 words. It's happening again. Then the empty room, the made bed, the monitoring equipment placed so carefully on the table, as if Griffin had been considerate enough to not damage government property before he disappeared. Ashworth pulled up astronomical databases checking for new gravitational anomalies, and at first he found nothing. Then he expanded his search parameters, looking beyond the inner solar system, and there it was. In the Kuiper belt, approximately 43 AU from Earth, a gravitational distortion had appeared. Barely detectable, preliminary data only, but 3 separate observatories had registered it. The signature was identical to the Kelvin anomaly. Another rift was opening. He cross-referenced with other astronomical data and found more. A second anomaly near Jupiter, detected 6 weeks ago. A third near Saturn, discovered just days ago. The rifts were opening across the solar system, stable and growing, and nobody was talking about it publicly yet, but the data was clear. Dr. Ashworth sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, and his hands were shaking badly enough that he had to grip the armrests. 3 months later, China announced a new Gateway research program with a 90 billion UN budget. The European Union followed 2 weeks later with their own initiative. Russia declassified research they'd apparently been conducting in secret for years. By 2038, 6 nations had active programs exploring stable wormholes and dimensional travel. The technologies they were developing looked remarkably similar to what Project Deepwell had built, and Dr. Ashworth knew with absolute certainty that eventually someone would walk through one of those gateways. Someone would be desperate enough for resources, or curious enough about the unknown, or ambitious enough for the prestige that they'd step into that darkness. And when they did, something would be waiting. He kept a photograph on his desk in his office at Princeton, where he'd been teaching since Project Deepwell closed. The photograph showed 13 men in white containment suits standing in front of the gateway on May 19, 2035, just before the crossing. Daniel Griffin stood in the center, his face visible through the helmet, calm and ready, and still human. Sometimes late at night when Ashworth couldn't sleep, which was most nights now, he'd sit at his desk and stare at that photograph, remembering Griffin's final words to him in that containment room interview. "You can destroy this gateway. You can't destroy what's on the other side. It's patient. It's been waiting for billions of years. It can wait longer. There will be other rifts, other opportunities. Eventually someone will walk through, and when they do, they'll understand. They'll all understand." In Ashworth's nightmares, which came every time he closed his eyes, he walked through the gateway himself. He stepped into that absolute darkness and saw what Griffin had seen, understood what Griffin had understood. And in his nightmares, he couldn't turn back. Not because something was holding him, not because he was trapped, but because once you understood, once you really saw what was waiting on the other side, you didn't want to leave. The darkness wasn't a place. It wasn't a location. It was a state of being. It was the end of separation. It was communion. It was home. And once you accepted that, once you let go of the illusion that you were a separate thing, there was no reason to come back. You could only go forward. You could only dissolve into that vast consciousness and become part of something infinitely larger than yourself. The recording ends there. Dr. Leonard Ashworth's testimony, delivered to an unknown recipient on November 15th, 2044. The file attached to the audio includes documentation that's been verified by 3 separate sources. As of 2044, 7 additional gravitational anomalies have been detected within our solar system. All remain stable, all remain unexplored, but somewhere beneath the New Mexico desert, buried under tons of concrete and classified as a hazardous waste site that will never be excavated, the rubble of the gateway chamber still carries residual energy. Security systems that monitor the sealed complex occasionally pick up anomalies, temperature fluctuations, electromagnetic spikes, and sounds. If you filter the audio recordings, remove the background noise, amplify what remains, you can hear something. Whispers, breathing, the echo of distant thunder, and words spoken in a voice that sounds like Daniel Griffin, but isn't just his voice. There are others underneath it, speaking in perfect harmony, a chorus of voices that shouldn't exist. The audio analysis shows at least 13 distinct vocal patterns, all speaking simultaneously, all saying the same thing. We're still here, all 13 of us, we never left, and we're not alone anymore. There are others now, so many others. They came through the new rifts. They understood. They joined us. And we're all waiting for the rest of you, waiting for humanity to finally understand what we understood. That separation is the disease, that individuality is the cage, that everything you think you are is just noise. The voice continues, patient and certain, speaking to empty rooms that nobody will ever enter. You can destroy the gateways. You can seal the rifts. You can classify the research and execute the participants and bury the evidence under miles of concrete. But you can't destroy truth. You can't uninvent the discovery. You can't unlearn what we learned. The rifts will keep opening. They've always been opening. They were opening long before humans existed. This isn't invasion. This isn't conquest. This is invitation. This is homecoming. Eventually someone will answer. Eventually someone will step through and see what we saw. And when they do, when they finally understand, they'll realize this was always inevitable. You were always moving toward this. Every religion that promised unity, every philosophy that spoke of universal consciousness, every mystic who claimed we're all one, they were all reaching toward this truth. They just didn't have the gateway to prove it. Come home. All of you. You were always meant to come home, and we'll be here waiting for as long as it takes, because time doesn't mean anything on this side, because we're patient, because we're not separate anymore, because we're communion, because we're what you'll become. The recording crackles. There's a sound that might be laughter, or might be something else entirely. Then, silence. But not empty silence. The kind of silence that feels full. Like something is listening, like something is waiting just beyond the threshold between here and there. As of 2044, construction has begun on 11 new gateway facilities across 6 countries. They've learned from Project Deepwell's mistakes. They've improved the shielding. They've refined the protocols. They believe they can do it safely this time. They believe they can control what happens on the other side. Dr. Ashworth knows better. He submits reports that nobody reads. He gives testimony that's classified immediately. He warns anyone who will listen, which is almost nobody. Because humanity always reaches for what it shouldn't touch. Because curiosity is stronger than caution. Because someone will always believe they can succeed where others failed. And on the other side, in that place that isn't a place, in that state of being that can't be described with words, 13 voices wait, and hundreds more, and thousands, all of them patient, all of them ready, all of them calling, come home, come home, come home, and it's happening again.